Hi everyone, welcome to FrankensteinsFabrics Mystery Block 12. Today is the tutorial for Block 1, so January, and we are doing a checkerboard block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process, moving between a cutting mat, your ironing board and your sewing machine to get your block to completion. So this will be an interesting one. It's a very good technique to have in your skill set, as it is all about accuracy to get those checkerboard blocks, squares within the block, looking really good. So here we go. Okay, so the first thing you would want to do is to select the two fabrics that you are going to be using for your checkerboard block. Now I have used two here. I'm using a print and a plain. In the instructions I have given you information about using two plains as well, so you can have high contrast between two colours, say a light and a dark. Black and white are also very good. Think of it like a racing flag for car racing, that kind of high contrast checkerboard. So I'm using a small print, the cat with the pumpkins. It's not a very large print. I keep your print as small as possible because we are cutting them into 2.5 inch squares. You don't want to lose too much of your print, and I'm using my coordinating orange. You want to, if you wash your fabrics first. I do not wash my fabrics first, but that is totally personal preference. So if you then want to wash, iron and starch your fabrics, now I use Mary Ellen's Best Press. I find this one to be gives me the most satisfactory finish. Because it's not a carbon, like a can with a carbon propellant, so like the CFCs and things like that. It's water based, and there's a few different fragrances, but I'll detail those below in the video. So this is just a water based one, so just spray it on both sides of your fabric and iron until it's dry. So my fabrics are ready to go. So what I'm going to do is, in the instructions it tells you to cut 3 2.5 inch strips. Now I'm right-handed, so I cut with my fabric my raw edge on this side so that my ruler goes this way. Now if you are left-handed, you will go the other way, and if you need help finding left-handed rulers, I can order those in for you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut our 3 2.5 inch strips. Now this fabric is already very straight. I don't have to trim it. If your fabric is a bit rough, like if you've bought it from somewhere and they cut it a bit rough, straighten up that first cut first. So I'm finding my 2.5 inch line, which is the dotted line through the center of these two here. I don't know how well you'll be able to see the numbers on the screen, but we'll do the best we can. So I'm finding a solid line at the bottom here, which you can't see on the camera, and then the 1/2 inch line here. Let me just move that up. There we go. So down here, I'm putting the ruler on a solid line, and then making sure my raw edge is on the 2.5 inch line. Fingers in the middle. I like to put my hand peaked like this so that I'm not flat. Fingers away from the edge, but balance. You get your rotary cutter, unlock it, start at the fold and push forward. If you need to do it in 2 sections, start here, cut, hold everything, and then move your hand up. Depends, some people find it hard to reach across a cutting counter, depending on how tall you are as well. So we then cut 2 more strips like that. Now I'm just going to move the board because I'm standing next to the camera. It's a little bit awkward to cut that way. So same again, solid line on the fold, 2.5 inch marking on the dotted line on my raw edge. and cut. So you need to do 3 of these and then 3 of your other fabric, and then we will head to the sewing machine. Okay, so here we have our machine set up. I've already wound some bobbins and threaded everything up. I have my 1/4 inch foot on my machine, and I want a scant 1/4 inch seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move my needle position across a couple of points, just so I can make sure that this is as scant as I can get it. Now everybody's 1/4 inch foot will be slightly different, and it's just a case of working out where your needle position is best suited. Now, I'm not a pinner. I will warn you of that now. So I'm not going to pin these strips. If you feel more comfortable and confident sewing with pinning, by all means do so. So I'm going to take my print strip and my plain strip, put one on top of the other, and sew down the full length. Now, please be warned that some homespuns tend to be shorter or sometimes even longer than regular print patchwork fabrics. Not sure why, but there's a lot that goes on with that. So now I'm just going to run this down, no reverse, and I'm using a Universal 80 Schmetz brand. I'm using Aurifil in white on my machine. And I am using my automatic settings on my straight stitch, which is 2.2. My tension's at auto. So this homespun's slightly shorter than the print fabric. So repeat for all of your strips, so it'll be 3 pairs, 1 print, 1 plain. Okay. Now we have our 3 pairs of strips joined together with our seam. We come to our ironing board and we have to iron them without stretching the fabric and creating a nice crisp line, and so we don't have this, I don't know if you can see the shadow of the seam coming through on the pale orange, so that means we're going to press our seams to the print fabric in my case. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. I like using steam, so I will use steam while I'm pressing. So what I tend to do is I will set the seam, which is ironing my set of strips as they are folded, the way we stitch them. And that sets that seam into that nice flat point that it was. I then want to flip them over so that the orange goes onto my print fabric. So I'm going to just gently stretch the fabric with my fingers, but not so that it buckles. And then I'm going to run the iron along and press that. Now what you don't want is a roll. You want to make sure that everything is pressed right out, so that because that's losing your measurement of your fabric if you do that. If you press everything so that it's nice and flat, you've got your full measurement across your fabric. So just go along gently and press that seam to your darker fabric, whatever you may have chosen. So what I do is run along from the back, so the wrong side of the fabric, do the whole length, And then I will turn it over and I will check, and I will gently push any of that seam that may have rolled over. Now it's important to do both sides of the fabric. That way you can also check that you've caught everything in the seam, that there's no thread sticking through. Now what you don't want to do is you don't want to steam and push. You want to press and nudge. Because if you push, you will end up curving your straight seam and your measurements will be out. So press all three and then we will go back to the cutting board. Okay, so here we have our strip set on the cutting mat. We want to take the selvage edge off, and then what we're going to do is we're going to join the 3 strip sets together. So take a solid line on your ruler and put it on the seam, and then just take the selvage edge off. Do that to one end of all of your strip sets, so the one where you've got your join is straight and not the rough end where the homespun was not the same length. And then we head back to the sewing machine. So take your strip set and join, making sure that you've alternated your fabrics. And join down the length. And there we have our 6 strips joined together. Press all of your seams that you've just done to the darker fabric or your print fabric, and then we're back to the cutting mat to then take the next step. Okay, so we now have our strip set all joined and pressed. We will now bring it back to our cutting table, and we are going to cut 2.5 inch strips. So line up your raw edge with the 2.5 inch marking and pick any line, preferably one of your straight seams, so that you've got a nice straight. Then fingers out of the way and cut. Now you want to cut 6 of these. Okay, so you can keep cutting. Once you've got 6, that's enough for 1 block. But as you can see, we've got enough here, we could do 2 blocks. And actually by the time you get to the end of it, you may have enough to do not quite 3. It would be a 5 by 6. So pop this aside, because we're actually going to be able to use this at the end when we finish off our quilt. We're going to join it into our backing fabric, or you could make a cushion or something like that to match. Now to the ironing board. So here we have our 6 strips. At this point, what we need to do is alternate every second strip. So that we have alternating fabrics. Now at this point, this is where I will start to use pins, and the reason being is because I want to get all those junctions as perfect as possible. So what happens is you need to take a pair of strips turn them so that they're facing you and flip the one on top over the one that's laying down. You then want to take each junction and sort of pinch the seam so that they meet in the middle, and then pop a pin in it. Now you can see that there's sort of where the curve of the seam junction is, meeting both. Do that for each one, and if you do have little gaps like this, this is where we will ease in our seams. So if you do that for each one, and do it for each set of strips, and then we do our 1/4 inch seam. Now this is the only time I will pin fabric, is because this technique, by pinning it at these junctions where they're nice and firm, means that I will get a better seam. So do that for all 3 strip sets and then head back to the sewing machine. Okay, here we have our 3 strip sets all pinned, and we are back at the sewing machine. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure that all of your seams don't flip the wrong way. So as you're sewing, just keep your finger on the top one, and when you get there to take the pin out, take the pin out and just flip up your fabric to see where that one at the bottom is. Now when seams are facing this way, your seam underneath will be facing the other way, so you'll be okay. So these ones where it's facing you, it will be more important to check the seam underneath so it doesn't get flipped by the lip of your machine. This process does take a little bit longer, but it is well worth it in the end. Now because I've used a directional print as one of my fabrics, when I make my block, my cats will be going upside down and in regular directions. I'm not too worried by this because this quilt is going to have a bit of a scrappy look to it, because I'm using bits and pieces out of my stash and a few other fabrics that I've collected along the way. So I'm not going to be worried about the fact that the cats are upside down, or if there's words upside down, because it's going to be in all directions. It's a bit of a sampler type quilt, so I'm not too worried. Now as you can see here, each junction where we pinned sits exactly where it should. So repeat and then join all 3 strip sets together using the same method of pinning those abutted seams. Then once you've done that, we head to the ironing board. Okay, here we have our block all stitched together. You can see on the back where our seams are. So all you need to do now is, I'm just going to choose one direction to iron these seams, because I'm not going to worry about any more junctions, because when I put this block into the quilt, I'm going to actually sash it, so there won't be any connecting junctions that I have to worry about. So I'm just going to hold the block with my left hand and just stretch it slightly to roll that seam out, and let the weight of the iron and the heat and the steam do its thing. Now my iron has a little water problem every so often, because it's time for a new one, but I haven't got that far yet. So if that happens, just make sure the water's not dirty and it doesn't mark your quilt. It's only water. So just give it a second and it'll fix it up, and then I'll just iron it. So the weight of the iron and the heat is doing all the work for me. I'm just gently tugging where I just need to roll the seam out slightly. And once again, turn it over to check everything, and then you can iron. Now at this point, if you choose to, you can also restarch your block, which I would suggest doing just because we are going to be doing these over 12 months. You want the block to stay in the best condition that it can. And I do find if you leave things for too long, they can move and shift and things like that. So what I'm just going to do here is just starch the block, and then I'm going to actually put it in a container that's nice and square, and all my blocks are going to be stored. Now this starch that I'm using is Mint Splash. There's a very nice minty fragrance floating around once it heats up. Starch is an excellent way to control fabric if you've not had a lot of experience handling fabric. Now you can iron from both sides with starch. And you can see how nice and crisp all of our seams are. And then the last task we have to do is we need to measure our block and make sure it is 12.5 inches, raw edge to raw edge. So in order to do that, we're going to head back over to the cutting mat. We're going to find the center of our block, and we're going to trim up any edges that are not quite right. So I'm going to let that dry naturally now. I'm very happy, and you can see how beautiful that is with the starch. Okay, so here we have our checkerboard block. It is all ready to go, and I'm just going to check my measurements. It's a little tiny bit off on a couple of the edges there, but it's good enough for me. I'm not going to worry, because when I sash this block, I will be able to disguise. There's a slight bow here. It's not entirely straight, as you can see here, but I'll show you how to disguise that in sashing when we put our quilts together. So I'm happy with this block. I enjoy that it's nice and bright and colourful, and I love the cats. So I will now put this into storage with the other fabrics, and we will continue making blocks throughout the year and then come back and join everything together. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll do my best to help. Thanks for watching. Bye.